Hey guys, so a little change of scenery. I'm downstairs recording in my living room in front of my fireplace. Behind me is my mantle. That illustration up there is one of mine from undergrad. So this is not a studio tour or anything like that. It is the 8th day of November, and that means it's time for our 8th Art SoundOff. And today, a viewer, Joseph Coco, asked me to share two things. He asked me to share my do's and don'ts for buying art supplies, just in a general sense, and my favorite sources for cheap art supplies. And this is actually take two. So, my do's and don'ts are, if you have a group of friends who are arty people, do go shopping with them and do take turns buying expensive things and sharing them amongst the group. When I lived in Savannah and I was attending SCAD, I had a bunch of other comic friends and we would take turns buying expensive materials, and then, somebody would have a party and we'd all go play with everybody else's toys. So, for example, I brought a bunch of Copics over one evening and my friend brought a bunch of watercolors one evening, and we took turns. We did a round robin where we each did a line art piece and printed off two other copies and exchanged them. So from the piece that I drew, they used my markers, and for the piece that Heidi did, we used watercolors, and then the piece that Sarah did, we did black and white inks. So that is a good way to save some money and familiarize yourself with supplies that you might not have. If you have a friend who already has a kitted out studio, why not ask them if you can come play with their toys sometime? You might need to bring a little bit of a bribe, some tasty food, a cool video, something you know they're actually interested in. Not just what you think they'd be interested in, but something they would be interested in. Because you wouldn't believe how many people try to bribe me with stuff that is just like, not a good bribe, no. So if you have access to somebody else's studio and supplies, why not see if they'll let you play with it? I have a large format scanner because I do big watercolor comics, and if I had friends who were interested in traditional format things or needed to use a large format scanner, I would let them come over and use it. I also have a large format printer, and the same applies to that. Why should they, unless they're doing this on the regular, why should they buy a $2,000 piece of equipment for one-time use? And yes, you can go to printers and copier places, and sometimes they have that sort of equipment, but it tends to be poorly maintained and ill calibrated. Mine is very well maintained, and it is properly calibrated because I do watercolor comics, so it needs to be properly calibrated. So if you can play with somebody else's toys to figure out if you like them first, do that. So for those of you who are younger, I know a lot of you have commented that you got into art because you have a family member who's into it. Why not see if they'll let you borrow their supplies or let you play with their supplies before asking for your own? They may also have hand-me-downs that they're no longer using that they would be happy to pass on to you. So again, if you have an art friend who's got a kitted out studio, why not ask if they... So when I buy markers, when I do art snacks, when I do those sort of things, sometimes I'll get duplicates, and I put all of those aside and I give them to certain friends when I see them, just because I would rather home them than try to sell them and take the loss, or keep them and have a complete hoarder's den of art supplies that I may never get to. I would rather these things be enjoyed and used than just kept in a drawer somewhere. So you may have a friend who does buy duplicates every now and then. Just ask them if you can buy them off of them for a much reduced cost or have them. Depending on the friend and their income level, they may want you to pay for them, or they may be okay with just letting you have them and eating them as steak. It really depends on the person. Next, I don't buy large sets of things. I happen to like my watercolors from a variety of brands. I like my markers from a variety of brands. If I purchased the 72-piece Copic set, I would have closed myself off to Prismacolor and Shinhan Twin Touch, and they sometimes make better colors than Copic does, like purples, yellows, certain greens, certain reds. Those are just better in Prismacolor and Shinhan. And that you should also, if you are buying a set, you don't have access to testing and swatching those markers. So even though you are going to pay more open stock, you're going to get a chance to swatch them and see what colors you like, and only purchase the colors you're going to use. So if you're like me and you primarily draw people, you're really going to want colors that are skin tone colors, or peaches or red violets that go well with skin tones, hair colors, eye colors, things like that. And Copic does not sell a comprehensive large set that includes all that. Years ago, I was trying to recommend one Copic set to beginners to get started with, and I just couldn't find one that covered the bases well enough for me to recommend it. Now, they have been introducing smaller sets, so my advice may not be relevant at this point in time, but I still feel like if you're building a collection, you should tailor your collection to your needs and not just buy a set just to buy a set. So, gee whiz. Sorry, I always have like a really hard time concentrating when I'm doing these things. Copics. Oh yeah. Don't just buy name brand. Like, for example, Blick has Blick Studio brush markers, which I've talked about a lot on this channel, and they're great. They're a brush tip alcohol marker. They have twin tips, a chisel tip and a brush tip. The brush is pretty good. The chisel's pretty good. They're not intended to be refillable. They're not intended to have replaceable nibs, but they're cheaper than pretty much all of the other brands, and they come in a wide range of colors. So if you're just getting started out, or if you're trying to flesh out your collection with some colors you don't frequently use, the store brand may be a good way to do that. Another example would be Soho watercolors. They are hit or miss, and I've had a lot of people complain to me that they don't like them because they are fugitive. Well, depends on what you're going to be using it for. Like I said, I do watercolor comics, so after I scan my page, it lives in an archival box for however long. So as long as that original scan looks good, it doesn't necessarily matter to me if the page itself will last 100 years. And I know that's not really forward thinking of me, and when I do commissions and standalone illustrations, I do use more archival pigments, but having a Soho color thrown in every now and then is probably not going to ruin the entire piece. And with watercolor or marker, if you're displaying a piece in direct sunlight, it's going to get ruined anyway. So let's see. Oh yeah, why don't we move on now to some sources for inexpensive art supplies. I like to go shopping at Jerry's Artorama, and because it's in Nashville, we don't have a lot of art stores here. We have a Plaza and we have Paper and Ink Arts, which I'll get to in a minute, but we have a Jerry's. And I love going to Jerry's because they always have weird things or brands I'm not familiar with, and I can always pick up one or two things. They have a lot of open stock stuff. I like doing my art supply shopping in person. So if you have an art supply store, and I don't mean Michael's, if you have an art supply store, you ought to try to get out there instead of just ordering online. You may also have the opportunity to build relationships with the employees and the people who work there, and they may give you samples every now and then, like the staff at David's Art Supply in New Orleans does for me sometimes. So having that sort of an in-person relationship, supporting a local business, well, not that Jerry's is local, but David's is to New Orleans, where I'm from. So those are both great ways to be able to experience those supplies firsthand before you spend the money, support a local business, and maybe not invest in supplies that you're not going to use. Another inexpensive source is, depending, you can find things on Amazon using Prime for a very, very competitive price. You can also find art supplies on eBay, and I know some people who do that, but I really just don't trust it. I've gotten burned with eBay too many times. And depending on where you live, Craigslist may be a good option. Now that I live in Nashville, the art supply options on Craigslist are always horrifically disappointing, just ruined garbage. But back when I lived in Savannah, a lot of the art supply listings on Craigslist were just people trying to unload materials that they used once, didn't care for, and wanted to find a new home for it. I mean, when I was moving out of Savannah, I pretty much gave away 100 pounds of barely used Roma clay because I wasn't going to be using it ever again, because I don't care for sculpture, and I tried selling it and it wasn't moving. So depending on where you live, Craigslist might be a good option. You can also watch sites like Mashdrop if you're into fountain pens or inks. They do not have a dedicated art community. Art is shelved in under crafts, just like everywhere else. But they do, the way Mashdrop works is they have a community of people who vote for objects, and then Mashdrop makes deals with the manufacturers to lower the price for their community. So you can get some really good deals on some very luxury goods if that's what you're into. Lastly, I highly recommend you competitively check Dick Blick and Jerry's Artorama websites, or go there in person, because they do sales all the time in person. They're always some surprise sale when I go in. Very much worth your time. Please do not do the whole Dick Blick, that's terrible, because they're an art store and we're artists and we don't make a whole lot of money. So my camera is telling me I better get a move on. I guess that was my vlog. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Bye!